Hello.
Hello and good morning. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Really good. Thank you.
I got to tell you something here, Andrew. I love the fact that you have put this on an ESPN podcast because I love me some sports, but I love it when my imagination can take in a story and create a journey with you.
Oh, well, that's really lovely to hear. I think that's the best feedback anybody could give us. We want to tell this story that is a lot more than just about sports. It's a journey, and it's a really thrilling roller coaster.
Well, there's so many times in this story that I see other players that you could also lean on as well. For instance, like when I think of Hobey, I mean, he served this nation just like Ted Williams served this nation, and I love the fact that you introduce us to things like that.
Yeah, at the time he was sort of Tom Brady, Michael Jordan,
yes.
Ted Williams, all wrapped up into one, right? He's the biggest celebrity sports, but then he becomes the biggest war hero celebrity as well. Front page news constantly. It's almost like combining The Great Gatsby with The Natural, with Chariots of Fire, Lawrence of Arabia. It's all these sort of legendary stories wrapped up in this one guy.
Now, for listeners that are chiming in, who is Hobey Baker and what's going on here? Because if they're not a hockey player, I want them to forgive that they're not a hockey player and just get into this story.
So Hobey Baker is the award for the best collegiate hockey player in America today. Yep. Is the Hobey Baker Award. So it's like the Heisman of hockey. So he was perhaps one of the greatest American hockey players of all time. He played predominantly between 1910 and 1916. He was otherworldly. He sort of invented the type of skates that they use today. He was better than anybody else on the ice. He, even as a prep school kid, as a teenager at St. Paul's in New Hampshire, which is the cradle of hockey in America, he just was dominant. And he was also this fabulous football player.
Yes.
He didn't wear a helmet. He had flowing blonde locks. Woodrow Wilson, the president of Princeton and then later the president of America, would just walk over and watch Hobey practice as his sort of moment of zen. He was every sport he tried, he was great at. At Princeton, he was only allowed to play 2 sports, but he could have been on 6 or 7 different teams.
How did Percy Rivington Pine II become a game changer in this?
So Percy Rivington Pine is the son of Moses Taylor Pine, who's one of the top 10 wealthiest Americans at the time. Yep. In fact, Moses Taylor Pine basically bankrolled Princeton University, changed it from being sort of a provincial community college to being what we know of today as this legendary university. And Percy was a playboy. He loved throwing the most elaborate parties. He was a club man. He was the leader and board member of 35 different clubs in America. He was friends with the Astors and the Vanderbilts and the Goulets and all the Gilded Age people that we see portrayed on TV today. And Percy and Hobey developed a relationship when Hobey went to Princeton in 1910. And that is part of what we uncover through the podcast, their relationship.
You spoke in the very beginning that Hobey was actively involved with everything outside sports as well. And when I learned that he worked with J.P. Morgan, it's like, my God, people go there for a career. It's not just one of the things I did in this everyday life.
Yeah, the interesting thing for me was that, he didn't go to work for J.P. Morgan. He literally worked for Julius Pierpont Morgan and in the basement clipping coupons. And this is one of the things about our great actor. He loved flying on the ice and on the football field and just all the daring things that he did. But then he ends up clipping coupons in the basement of Wall Street, J.P. Morgan on Wall Street in New York. And of course, it's just devastatingly boring to him. Mm-hmm. He says, I'm a caged tiger. I just want to be outside in the free air to do what I do. And this is one of the issues about, his war service. Later on, he goes to France in 1917. After the war, what's he going to do? He's no longer this great athlete. His celebrity days are sort of over. He's now a war hero, but I don't want to go back. Hobey says, I don't want to go back and work in the basement of J.P. Morgan. I'm not a desk man. Mm-hmm.
But you know what, though? He's got so much courage inside his soul, and taking those chances out on that field and on that ice. And then even when it comes to the war, he wanted one more last flight. And that is an experience.
Yeah, he makes it all the way through the war. I mean, we have to remind listeners that life expectancy for a World War I fighter pilot was about 23 days.
Yep.
It was incredibly dangerous. It's only 15, 16 years after the Wright brothers fly the first plane in North Carolina. So these planes are really weak and fragile. But Hobey makes it all the way through the war. After the armistice on November 11th, 1918, he's back with his men. He's the squadron commander in Toul in France, and he gets his discharge papers. And he motorcycles over to HQ and says, I don't want to go back. Don't send me back. I'm not going to go back without my men. And his commanding officer says, you have to go back. You've been here longer than anybody else.
Wow. So
he goes to the field. And he says, okay, you know what, boys, I'm going to take up my plane for one last flight, which is, you never say, I'm going to take up my plane for one last flight. And of course, the podcast then goes into what happened on that fateful day where he did take up his plane for one last flight.
Oh, goodness. The podcast we're talking about is the ESPN podcast, Searching for Hobey Baker. David Duchovny is the host. You could not have asked for a better vocal talent.
Yeah, we were so lucky to get David. And the nice thing was that he's a Princeton graduate. He graduated in 1982. He told me that he came to play basketball, but he ended up playing a bit of baseball at Princeton. And I pitched him this story. And he obviously knew of Hobey Baker because there's the Hobey Baker rink at Princeton. And Hobey Baker is such an iconic alumnus figure at Princeton. And David, after 2 or 3 sentences of me pitching him this idea, said, I'm going to do it. I love this idea. I'm going to be a narrator, which was very kind. And you know, I think David, the nice thing about David Duchovny is that he has the voice. He has this great narrator's voice, but also everybody knows it's him, right?
Yep.
If you like X-Files, if you like Californication, if you like any of his more recent movies, you know it's David Duchovny. And he has this sort of very suave, laid-back coolness. So he was our dream narrator.
What did you learn during this project?
Well, one thing that I did learn was that there was a lot more space for these gay relationships before the First World War than I ever realized, and I think most people realized. Men didn't think of themselves as gay or straight. They thought of themselves as having passions and loves, and they might love men and they might love women as well. But there wasn't this like box. You weren't labeled into a box in the same way. And also, America did not attack the homosexuals as much as they did from the 1930s, 40s onwards, right? Yep. So there is a space for these people. There's a space for Hobey and Percy to be as a couple living together. And of course, they're not ostentatious. They're not out there holding hands in public, but everybody knows, and it's sort of accepted on the down low.
Wow. I can't thank you enough for this story. You got to come back to this show anytime in the future. The door is always going to be open for you, Andrew.
Thank you. I appreciate that. This is great.
Well, you be brilliant today, okay?
Thank you.